couple minutes. We are going to wait a couple minutes to let other folks join us, but we appreciate you taking the time and we're looking forward to sharing with you today. Good afternoon, everybody. We're still waiting to let some additional folks in, but we'll get started real soon. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited. We are going to talk about redefining affordable housing and its role in ending homelessness. And we're very excited to have David Lowe, the Director of Policy and Communications at Destination Home, and our own Fatima Burgos, who is our communications manager, and will be sharing, I think, collectively the work that our organizations have been doing to bring some additional perspective and insight to the connections as we move into a real important season that we're going to have lots of ongoing discussions about affordable housing and the connection to homelessness in cities throughout the county. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If I could have the next slide. We want to begin, as we do, with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the Ohlone, Muwekma, the Ramaytush Ohlone, Tamiya Nation, and Amamutsin, on which we are learning, working, and organizing together today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are part of our community.
Okay, I can jump in with the next slide. Thank you, Matthew. So as Matthew said, I'm Fatima. I'm the communications manager at SB at Home. So we want to just start with code of conduct today. So we want to ensure that the conversations today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind to each other, no rude comments or personal attacks. We do encourage asking questions and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please remember that today's event is focused on redefining affordable housing and its role in ending homelessness. So please keep your questions and the chat on topic. And sometimes the chat can get lively. So if you find that it is distracting you from the content or the discussion, we encourage you to close the chat temporarily. And if a person is being disruptive or violating our code of conduct, they may be removed with or without warning. So just so you know, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Please drop your questions in the chat as we go along if there's anything that sparks interest, and we will have time at the end to answer all of your questions. So with that, Corey, could you please go to the next slide? So today, as was mentioned, we're going to be talking about SB at Home's campaign. It's a messaging campaign focused on redefining affordable housing how we talk about it, and equipping everyone with messaging tools in order to have these conversations. And so the need for understanding was something that we became aware of in conversations with so many of our partners and just in our work itself. So that inspired us to launch some research with focus groups that found that homelessness and housing affordability are top of mind concerns. However, the term affordable housing is problematic and confusing. People didn't know how to define it, they didn't know what it meant. And so that was creating a lot of issues in conversation with people. And at the same time, building more housing is not seen as directly addressing homelessness or housing affordability. So those two problems remain separate in people's minds, although we understand that they go hand in hand. And David is going to talk a lot more about that during his presentation. We also found that there is high distrust in government and its ability to address homelessness. People feel like no one's really doing anything about the problem. And with all of that said, there's still a willingness to address homelessness and a hope that it can be solved. So there is still some optimism out there about what we can do regarding this issue. So next slide, please. So with all of that in mind, we have crafted a definition that you can see here. So it is a lot of text and we will go through it and I will explain all of it. But this is the definition that we have come up with to define affordable housing. And so this is what we as SV at Home and our partners are going to be using in our own language. And it's a three-part definition because it's telling a story. So um, each kind of section of this is addressing a different question that came out of our focus group research and just kind of frequently asked questions about affordable housing. So again, I will go through each of these and kind of explain them, but I just want to leave this up here. I can read it just so we can kind of listen to it as well. So affordable housing is an asset that sustains and strengthens our communities by ensuring we all have a safe, stable home. Affordable housing is the public's answer to addressing the needs of people harmed by our housing market. It is a bridge between our current inequitable system and a place where everyone in our community can thrive. Affordable housing provides a range of housing solutions that each address the diverse needs of local residents who cannot afford the cost of housing in Silicon Valley. So, this is our definition, and our hope is that this is something that all of you can use and take with you. There is such a need for a shared definition, and it only will strengthen our work and our impact and our advocacy efforts when we can all be aligned in how we talk about this. So, now I'll kind of break it down for you. So next slide, please. So the first question that we're trying to address here is what is the benefit of affordable housing? So this first part of the definition is kind of more ideological, and it's making the case for affordable housing and just showing that it does strengthen our communities. It ensures that people have a place to call home and just the importance of that. And some of the language that is used here is part of our larger messaging campaign, which I will go into in a little bit. But it was really intentional on our end to start on a very positive note and to kind of show that to us, affordable housing is a good thing. It's an asset and it's helping people in our community who need it most. So that is why we started with this. Next slide. So question number two that we get often is what problem does affordable housing address? And kind of the understanding of how did we get here? Why are we in this mess? Why is everything happening now? And at SV at Home, we really pay attention to kind of the trajectory and the decisions that have led to us being here and the intentional policy choices that have led to the crisis that we're facing now. So we wanted to be very specific about our language here. And when we say the public, the goal here is to kind of a call for collective action. So obviously our elected officials are responsible for making a lot of these decisions, but everyone in this room and everyone in the community and advocates are all part of this as well. And so it's a call to all of you and to everyone that you know to kind of get involved because we can only do this together. And we also wanted to be explicit about harms that our housing market have caused. And so the language here was a little bit challenging because we had exclusionary housing market, and then we felt like that wasn't maybe accessible for everyone to understand what's happened here. And so we did want to call that out explicitly because, again, there have been explicit decisions that were made that led us to where we are today. So, and then we wanted to kind of show that currently we have this inequitable system, but the goal is obviously a place where everyone in our community can thrive, everyone has a home. And so kind of creating that understanding that affordable housing is the way to get to that. So that is number two. Next slide. So who does affordable housing help and how? So of the three, we think that this is the most sort of technical definition of all. And for transparency's sake, this process of creating a definition was incredibly challenging because we did want to just say one thing, right? Affordable housing is this one thing, and here's an easy answer that you can take and tell everyone. But the more that we thought about this and the more that we brainstormed collectively, we realized that that wasn't true. Affordable housing isn't just one thing, it's a range of solutions, and each of them are trying to support the different needs that members of our community have. So, across the board, not everyone has the same needs, and affordable housing needs to address all of them. So, that was kind of our goal, is to explicitly state that. And in order to show, there are so many different types, and even in our community, so many different developments that are geared towards and targeted towards, different people and the different needs of our community members. So that was the thought here. And again, this is kind of the more technical one, talking about, people who cannot afford the cost of housing. And some of you may be surprised or not that we didn't go into the specifics of AMI and things like that. And that was very intentional. We didn't want to get into a lot of the technicalities and the jargon that we often hear, because we wanted this to be accessible and to kind of bring people in at all levels of understanding, and making a definition that could be crafted to welcome people in, increase understanding, even if it's just at a very basic level to begin with. So that is our definition. It's not going to go away after this. It's on our website, and we will share kind of all the resources for you to use that. So no worries if you didn't capture all of that just now. Next slide, please. So in addition to a definition, we've crafted a framework to support people in having these conversations. So any of you in the room who have had a conversation about affordable housing probably understands how challenging it can be sometimes. And we know that there are a lot of narratives out there around misconceptions and negative kind of stereotypes about affordable housing and homelessness. And so we didn't want to create a counter narrative. And so what I mean by that is that in messaging, we know that when you get stuck in this back and forth of, arguing with someone or trying to fact check the things that they're saying, it only makes their argument stronger because you're repeating something back to them. So in saying like, no, this statement is wrong, you're repeating it and reinforcing it for them. And so at a larger scale, we didn't want to be doing that back and forth reinforcing. We wanted to create our own strong message and eventually a strong narrative built up by all of our stories and different messages that we will share collectively, and to use that to really make the case for affordable housing and not fall into the trap of myth busting and things like that. So the 5 S's, which hopefully is easy to remember. We wanted to make them all start with the same letter. And this is kind of a framework for you to be able to have conversations about affordable housing in a way that is consistent, cohesive, and strong. So we will go into each of them, and I will explain a little bit more. So next slide, please. And like I said, all of these are available. So, if any of them speak to you and you want to share it on your own pages, all of this is all the graphics are available as well. So, Affordable housing sustains is the first one, and affordable housing sustains our communities to ensure nobody has to be displaced from the place they call home. It creates opportunities for every member of our community, regardless of their income level, to thrive here. So, here we explicitly call out displacement, which I'm sure a lot of you know is a huge issue that our community is facing, the loss of community because people are being pushed out. And so, we really wanted to kind of emphasize keeping people here and not even, just keeping them here, but giving people the opportunity to make choices as opposed to being forced to make a decision to leave because of the high housing costs. So, and again, regardless of income level, everyone should be able to be part of our community. So, emphasizing that once again. Next slide. Supports. Affordable housing supports the people who are essential to our communities by ensuring they have homes they can afford. It also benefits our cities by allowing further generations to continue building their lives and investing in the ecosystem where they grew up. So we wanted to emphasize that people who are essential to our communities as opposed to essential workers or the language of that, because people shouldn't have to be working or kind of producing something in order to be valuable members of our community. And that is something that we believe and really wanted to emphasize that all of our neighbors can be essential to our communities because everyone brings something different. And as a messaging framework, we know that when we talk about generations, people really value that and people really value being able to have their kids stay in the communities where they grew up, if that is something that they want, or, grandparents and parents and children. And so kind of keeping families together. So it's a really strong messaging tool, and we really wanted to emphasize that as well. Next slide. Stabilizes. Affordable housing stabilizes those facing housing insecurity by providing a safe, stable, and permanent place to call home. The only true solution to homelessness is permanent housing. So, as you know, the second part of this conversation is going to focus on that last sentence. The only true solution to homelessness is permanent housing. So, we know that housing ends homelessness, and this is something that we strongly believe at SV at Home. And the focus here is affordable housing that is permanent, right? So at the same time, we want to make it clear that interim housing and shelters are also important strategies in the continuum of care. And we understand that and we value that as well. So this isn't to say that those things are not important, but we really know that those things can only be successful if someone has a permanent home to move into after. So, um, and also trying to move away from only talking about homelessness. Housing insecurity can look a million different ways. And so, kind of using that language to open up the conversation as well, and seeing how this crisis is affecting people at all different levels. Next slide. Okay, strengthens. Affordable housing strengthens our communities by sustaining the growth of vibrant small businesses, preserving rich cultural experiences, and ensuring neighbors look out for each other. We all benefit from neighborhoods that reflect all of us and unite us in our shared humanity. So, we know that language around diversity or having diverse neighborhoods or diverse communities doesn't always work because that isn't necessarily a shared value that everyone has. Some people really believe in that, others don't. Others want their neighborhoods to look just like them. And so we really wanted to emphasize tangible examples of how this strengthens our communities by talking about small businesses, by talking about experiences, neighbors, and this is an opportunity. Like I said, this is a framework, but this is where you can build off and talk about your own experiences, right? And pointing out things in your own community, parks and schools and things like that, that we can all share and kind of be united around. And so this was kind of our example of that. And again, we did talk about shared humanity, and something that has come up a lot as we've done this training and talked to people about this framework is kind of the underlying shared values that go with all of these. And so being able to, in conversation with someone, share a shared value and have a connection there and kind of have that as an end to a conversation. And so, again, this is intended to kind of start the conversation and to allow everyone to share their stories and to build off of it as well. And final slide, please. Solves. Affordable housing solves our homelessness crisis and the profound loss of community caused by neighbors being pushed out. Stable, affordable homes are proven to be what we need to stop overcrowding, rent burdening, displacement, and evictions. So, again, this is another point where we wanted to emphasize all the many ways that this crisis affects people. So, it's not just displacement, it's not just homelessness. It can mean, multiple people having to live in a small place because rent is so high, or being evicted, or all these other things. And so, kind of being really explicit about all the many ways that harm is being caused on people in our community and our neighbors was really the goal here. So, those are our 5 S's. Antonia is going to drop a link in the chat, which is going to take you to our webpage where we have all of these kind of tools laid out, the definition, the messaging framework, and the hope here is for all of you to really be able to use these as a conversation starter and to also create cohesion in our community and in our field on how we talk about these things. So we know that if we have 15 different definitions and someone is really trying to understand what is out there, it's going to make it incredibly challenging when you're getting different information from all these different places. And so the more kind of consistency that we can create in a shared definition is really important for the work we're trying to do and the advocacy that we're trying to do. So again, we will have opportunities at the end for any questions, but now I want to pass it on to David Lowe from Destination Home. So I'm just going to share a little bit about their work and about David and then pass it along to him. So Destination Home is a public-private partnership ending homelessness in Silicon Valley. Through their collective impact model, they convene and collaborate with stakeholders across the community to advance strategies that address the root causes of homelessness and help ensure that our most vulnerable neighbors have a stable home. They embrace a data-driven and human approach to their work, advocating for policies, incubating new ideas and programs, and investing in strategies that reduce and prevent homelessness in our community. So Destination Home is a huge partner of ours and someone that we love to work with. And David is their Director of Policy and Communications. He brings more than a decade of public policy and strategic communications experience to Destination Home's work to end homelessness in Silicon Valley. Before joining Destination Home, David served as a senior advisor and communications director to San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, where he was intricately involved in the mayor's efforts to combat Silicon Valley's homelessness and affordable housing crises. So thank you, David, for joining us. I will pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fatima, and thank you, SB at Home, for putting on this event today and for inviting us to be part of it. Super, and for all of you for joining us, because it's a really super important topic, right? We all know we're in a housing crisis, but we're finding a lot of challenges as we figure out how we can get the housing built that we need. And a lot of this has to do with perception and messaging. And so we really just appreciate starting to dig into this issue. And one thing we thought would be helpful to talk about, to follow up on Fatima's great presentation about how we start talking and thinking about affordable housing, is how we help people connect that to our homelessness crisis. Because, some of that same research that Fatima referenced before showed us that for a lot of voters, I think probably a few people here, because we're among the same supporters, but a lot of people don't always see that connection, or they see a connection but not understand how deep it is. So we thought we'd spend a little time today doing a little deeper dive into that particular issue and provide you all with some information that may help update how you think about it, but also empower you to be better messengers. So if we could throw the slides on, again, really what we're talking about here is how the connection between housing and homelessness, both on the cost side and ultimately that housing will end homelessness. And so I want to start our presentation with the one question, which we put up on the next slide, which is helping people understand, why is there so much homelessness in our community? If we can go to the next slide, please. And, I phrase this on there for a particular reason, because I think a lot of times when we think of causes of homelessness, we gravitate towards thinking about the individual circumstances and a person may have fallen that led to their homelessness. And it's an important question, but if you look at surveys and talk to people, what you find out is there is no one answer, right? There are a multitude of factors that can lead a person to homelessness. The most common cause is a job loss, but that's still something that maybe about 20 to 25% of people reference. People do talk about mental health, substance abuse, divorce, eviction. There's just a multitude of factors, and none of them are the primary cause. And even more so, what we see is that they're interrelated. People will say there were multiple things that led to their homelessness. So those answers are informative, but they run across the board. But in contrast, there has been a bunch of research that has started to show that this answer to this broader question, why is there so much homelessness in our community, and particularly relative to others across the country or the world, show that there are large structural forces that are really driving our homelessness crisis. And we put 4 up there on the screen here that we think play in the study play an important part in that. But I really want to focus in on this first one, because there's a growing body of evidence that shows while all of these factors really help contribute to our homelessness crisis, is this high rents and a lack of affordable housing that is the predominant factor. So we're going to take you through a couple of these studies that were particularly illuminating to us and hopefully will be to you. On the next slide, what you'll see is a graphic that was put out in a report by the USGAO, the Government Accountability Office. And they were looking at a number of different factors about homelessness responses in communities across the country. But as a baseline, they looked and said, let's understand what homelessness looks like in different parts of the countries. And this map here shows you 2 things. Each circle represents a community. The darker the green is in that circle, the higher the rent is, average rent, median rent in that community. Also, the size of the circle then correlates to how much homelessness there is in that community. And so the first thing that you're going to hear over and over again today, they found a strong correlation. The darker the green, the bigger the circle we have, right? So the higher the rents, the more homelessness we saw in our community. You can see us with maybe perhaps the darkest green and biggest circle of them all, but also pretty big in Hawaii, Honolulu, Los Angeles, pretty similarly up in Seattle, parts of the East Coast. And so we see that correlation play out. And what I love about this one too is I think we always focus on where there is a lot of homelessness, but look where there's not as much homelessness. I think there's a misperception out here that every major metropolitan city in the US has a lot of homelessness, but it's just not true. Some of our biggest communities, Houston, Texas, Chicago, where their homeless populations, relatively speaking, are smaller, and you can see that corresponding smaller increase or smaller absolute rent levels. So first piece of evidence that showed to us that the systemic reason, it really is these high rents that are driving homelessness. Next slide looks at another study, Zillow Research. They have been doing a lot more research, particularly because they have tons of real estate data. And they looked at a similar question, but what I thought was interesting here was they looked at it not just at absolute rent levels, the number of dollars, but as a percentage of what the average person spends of their income on rent. And in their analysis, they found that communities where once you get to about the average person spending about a third of their income on rent, they saw rapid increases in homelessness. So a very similar trend to what we saw before, but kind of manifested as a percentage of income on rent, because we know obviously rents are going to be higher in some areas, but it comes down to what's a rent that people can afford. Third study I want to show you on this rent was actually very recent from the Pew Research Center on the next slide. Pew Research Center does a lot of research analysis, nonpartisan, very credible organization, been around forever. And they looked at a slightly different question. So I think a lot of us know, okay, there's certain areas that have traditionally had homelessness, but what happens when you start talking about what rents as they change over time? And so they looked from 2017 to 2022, how much did rents increase or how much did rents change in communities across the country? And this is, represented by the chart on the left. And important to acknowledge here, as most of us know, in most normal circumstances, rents will likely go up just because of inflation, cost of living. So in however many, there are about 10 cities here, they saw rents go up in all the cities, but at differing levels, right? Half of them saw huge increases ranging from 30 to 60%. And then a quartet of cities down here, we saw much more modest increases, 10 to 12% over 5 years. And what they saw is, regardless of where they started on the homelessness levels, you saw a divergence in what happened to that relative amount of homelessness in their community. Unsurprisingly, because of what we heard so far, places with huge increases in rent saw pretty significant increases in homelessness. But in the cities that saw smaller increases in rent, it wasn't just a smaller increase, we actually saw decreases in homelessness. And showing that it is not just a static situation we're dealing with. Some communities are going to have high levels of rent, thus high levels of homelessness. But what happens within a community will also impact on which way those trends go. So a lot of evidence, and this is just kind of scratching the surface, showing that correlation. But we have to also address, what about all those other factors, right? All of us in these conversations about homelessness hear so many things about this is the, quote, true cause of homelessness. So what about those other factors? So the next slide talks about a book, came out, I don't know when it was published, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but a really good book called Homeless as a Housing Problem, excuse me. And it was written by 2 researchers out of the University of Washington. And they said, we want to do similar analysis. We want to understand what homelessness levels look like in different communities, but not just cross-reference it with housing costs, but all the other factors we commonly hear as the driver of our homelessness crisis. And as they did this analysis, they found to a T, just like the others, yes, housing costs was strongly correlated to high levels of homelessness, but no correlation for any of the other things they looked at. You know, rates of mental illness, no. Rates of substance abuse, no. Generous public assistance, no. We often hear the weather, right? Oh, right, all these warm cities will have a lot more homelessness, no. And then an interesting one, not even poverty, right? Not even high rates of poverty, which again, we know some of these factors may have an influence on who becomes homeless, what an individual's experience it is, but the amount of poverty in the community was not correlated to homelessness. It was back to high housing costs. So another piece of evidence, and I want to take a pause right here because I think it's important to say, I don't want anyone here to leave to think that I or Destination Home or others are saying that there isn't some intersectionality between these issues, because as we know, there is. And particularly at an individual level, people who may be struggling with these different issues could be at greater risk for ending homelessness. But what this analysis and these things show is at the systemic level, help us understand why we are suffering from so much homelessness in our community and not other communities like Chicago, Houston, Denver, is because we're not seeing the same housing market pressures that are leading to high housing costs and rents. And so all this is important for us understanding what our response to our homelessness crisis is and to meet the needs of individuals. But it also shows that if we're going to end homelessness, we have to focus on and make a priority that central root cause, which is our housing costs. And so if you go to the next slide, at least kind of where I want to take this is how we can really see that housing ends homelessness. And in the next slide, there are a lot of things we need to do to address our housing affordability crisis. But one of the most important, particularly for our community, is building more affordable housing. There are a lot of things we can do to address affordability, but with our supply and demand issue where we're on it, we're not going to get there if we don't build more affordable housing. And the one piece of good news we have here is we started down that path. The next slide shows investments made through the Measure A countywide housing bond that our voters approved in 2016 and unlocked about $1 billion for affordable housing development. And there was actually an action this past Tuesday at the Board of Supervisors where they have finished allocating all of those funds into actual real housing developments. So now we have been starting to build more than 50 affordable housing developments, 11 different cities. You can see the geographic distribution there, which will include more than 5,000 affordable homes. And they're opening up right now. Already 1,700 of those units, which are serving between like 2,500, 3,000 people right now, are already open, providing a safe, affordable place for people to live. And you can see many more of the pipeline that will continue coming online in the years ahead. And this tool, and it's been supplemented by many other funding sources adopted by the cities and states, are starting to address our affordable housing crisis. It's providing an immediate place for people who may be experiencing homelessness or at risk to go, and starting to chip away at that bigger, longer-term need to make our community more affordable. The next slide, besides just building those homes, we have also been focusing on the programs that help connect people in need to an affordable home. And there are a lot of different programs. This doesn't represent all of them, but I put out 3 that are kind of major focuses of our community's homelessness response that have been critically important to starting to address our homelessness crisis. Permanent supportive, all of them are a little bit different, and there's no one size fits all, but in these 3 in particular, permanent supportive housing is a long-term program. It's going to help find a person who's disabled, is chronically homeless, otherwise not going to need long-term support. So it provides a long-term housing subsidy along with those wraparound services that we know are important to keep them stably housed and help them stabilize overall in their life. We have rapid rehousing, which is a shorter term program, people who are at a lower level of need, or a lower level of need, excuse me. Usually gives it a time limited rental assistance or a time limited space in an affordable housing unit, anywhere from 1 to 3 years. It can depend. But then again, wrapping around with those supportive services that are going to help them stabilize and take a step back to self-sufficiency. And then third, and equally important to, we think, a destination home, we've been investing a lot in this, is the idea of homelessness prevention, and particularly providing targeted financial assistance and services to people who may be right at the cusp of ending up in homelessness. They're facing an eviction notice. They're in overwhelming financial constraints. And how can we help stabilize them where they are before of all the suffering and added costs of trying to get them rehoused? So a lot of different programs and different needs, because we know every individual and every circumstance, so there can't be a one size fits all. But by combining this affordable housing and services, what we've seen is tremendous success. You can see the retention rates there. These programs do work and are helping people find safe and stable housing for not just while they're in the program, for all those stats, or for what happens a year later, they're staying housed. And if you go to the next slide, this is just one example of an overwhelming body of evidence that's showing that these type of programs, or which are often commonly referred to as housing first programs, are working. And there's just a mountain of evidence. This is a great little graphic that the National Alliance to End Homelessness did, compiled. If you go to the website, you can actually click over on these different studies that show all this evidence that shows what we just saw in our own local data shows. These type of programs are successful in getting people into housing and remain stably housed. And even so, at rates that are higher than what the older models were, where you're requiring treatment first instead of housing first, and requiring sobriety and other type of conditions on the condition of getting into housing. And so even as we hear a lot more rhetoric in the world about how housing first has failed or whatnot, we'll talk about why we're not seeing the progress we want to in a second. The research shows that these programs are very successful in solving our problem. Next slide, please, because we shared a lot of data, which I think is important to look at it, but we can't forget that we need to listen to and center the voices of people who've experienced homelessness themselves. And so if you are in your community, we always encourage people to talk to people experiencing homelessness. A lot more are coming into these spaces to be active advocates as well. And there are other storytelling tools, which are easier to show on a slide. I put one up that the New York Times did, where they had in-depth conversations with 30 different people experiencing homelessness. And what you'll see is, one, again, it goes back to where we started. There's no one size fits all. Everyone's story is different. But you start seeing some of these themes emerge and commonalities. And a couple of stories here just show how important central that housing was to their stability and ending their homelessness or thriving later on. And we need to take all of this, the data, experiences, the things we're seeing from real human beings, to inform our response. And for us, what we've seen as we've done this and we talk in the community, we know that all leads us back to addressing this need for more affordable housing. So the last couple slides, so what, right? This is all great theoretical, but what does it mean for what we're doing as a community to end homelessness? Well, we have a community plan to end homelessness. It's a kind of a strategy that we, Destination Home, our government partners, nonprofits, service providers have all coalesced around to guide our response. And it is centered on these housing strategies. It's not exclusive to housing. We're building a lot more shelter. We're putting outreach. We are trying to improve those behavioral health services, addressing things like rents and eviction issues broader than that. But housing is at the center of it. And by doing that, over the past few years, we're about almost 3 full years into the plan, we've housed more than 11,000 people. We've helped 17,000 find shelter. We've prevented homelessness for 20,000 more. And we're starting to reduce the new number of families falling into homelessness. So we're taking some important steps. If you go to the next slide, you'll see another important way we track this. And this is what we call, very technically, inflow versus outflow. And what that really means is, how are we doing helping move people out of homelessness into housing? And how does that compare to the new families we see being pushed into homelessness in the first place? And before we started this new community plan in 2019, we looked at our countywide data on that, and we're doing very poorly. For every household we got into housing, 2.5 more were becoming homeless. Because of all this work, we're starting to narrow the gap. We're nowhere near where we need to be. You can still see we're upside down with those numbers. Well, we narrowed that gap too, where it's now 1 to 1.7. And that's one of those small signs of progress we're seeing of knowing that the strategies we're investing on can work. But we know we have so much work to do. Most of us wouldn't notice the difference on the street. And there's a real simple reason for that. We're still not scaling strategies at the level we need to meet the crisis. And we're not going to see the noticeable difference or hit those goals we need to if we're not committed to it. These are just signs of showing that they work and we can do it. But unless we as a community invest in the scale and commit to these strategies, we're not going to end homelessness. And while we have a lot of things we do, we need to still help people find shelter. We need better outreach. We need more services in the community. If we're not focusing on those housing solutions too, we're not going to get there. So last couple of slides, but show what do we need to do to end homelessness? It all comes back to housing. How are we going to continue building more of that affordable housing, and specifically the deeply affordable housing, the type of units that will be accessible to the people who are currently homeless or at risk of homelessness? How are we going to expand those rental assistance and subsidies and services to help match people with a housing situation that they need, both to prevent new people from falling in, as well as to help sustain our deeply affordable housing construction? And then third, we have to keep fighting this problem upstream. We have to adopt policies that address those root causes, namely our housing affordability crisis, but those other ones you saw at the beginning that we know are all contributing to pushing more people into homelessness so that we can equalize those trends on the graph you saw a minute ago. So we went through a lot here, and I know there's just so much more. If you want to learn, I'd be happy to take your questions in a minute, but please keep educating yourself. If you go to the next slide, we have put a lot of these resources, information. A lot of them are new on our website. In particular, we have this section called Understanding Homelessness, where we have a lot more of our educational materials, data, stories, information to help understand this broader issue, and particularly how it relates to housing. The page you see up there is a new page we built as part of this. If you've been there before, that really goes into myth versus fact and includes a lot of information, but also addresses some of those common things we hear about homelessness that just aren't true. And then the last slide, another section of our website is our Housing Ready Communities page. That's our community engagement initiative, and we have put a lot of these other tools and information in different formats because we hope you will consider sharing this through your social media when you're talking to people, and other tools that help you not only educate yourself but help us spread this word in this broader work. So thank you guys for being very patient. I went through a lot there, but when we get to the Q&A, I'm very happy to hear your comments, feedback, and answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. That was great. We can stop sharing for now. So we have a couple of minutes for Q&A. So any clarifying questions or more information that you want, either about SV at Home's messaging campaign or Destination Home's work around housing ends homelessness. So any questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat, and we will get to it. Yes, Agnes.
Yes, thanks. I was wondering if you have shared this information with the group that meets through Santa Clara County Supervisor's Otto Lee's office, because the question came up months and months ago about a common language and how do we address the unhoused crisis that we are facing. So have you thought about sharing this more broadly than with just us?
Yes, that's a great question. So we're taking it on the road, you can say. But if this is something we'll get to in the call to action, but if there are any groups that you personally know that you feel that this training or this information would be helpful for, you can reach out to us and we would be happy to arrange that. So I'll drop my email in the chat, and you or anyone else can feel free to email me. And I think the same for David's section as well. I think it's information that we're hoping to spread far and wide as much as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Ken?
Yeah, hi, thank you for this presentation. And I'm new to this. I joined the Santa Clara Housing Advocates over here in Santa Clara. And I'm by no means any expert, but I'm starting to learn about these things. I appreciate Mr. Lowe's presentation too, because it's a lot of new ideas that I'm becoming aware of. But I do have a question. I have studied a little bit in this area. I read a book. It's an old book, but there's a new introduction forward to it. It's called Modern Housing by Catherine Bauer Worcester, who was a famous houser and advised 3 presidents, starting with Roosevelt, about how to take care of the housing problem that was started in the Depression in the 30s. And after studying it a little bit, reading that book and listening to these presentations that I'm becoming more aware of, it seems to me that the housing issue, the way we build in the United States, the private developers are basically building for the top 30% of the population. And there's widespread general belief that the rest of the housing trickles down to everybody else, which is unfortunate. And I don't know if that's actually true, but she makes a case for that in her book. And the solutions that seem to be pointed in that book that I read, and some things I've read online, is that the public housing, if we wanted to create the amount of housing that we need and the numbers that you've mentioned in this presentation, that we have to build public housing on public lands. And of course, with tons of public input, and especially advocates for that. But it just seems like the capitalist system is never going to provide the amount of housing for the poor. It just seems that we tack on little Band-Aids. In my city, they just, what is SP Senate Bill 9 or something? Some of these projects that are near transit have to provide a small modicum or a small amount of housing for lower income people. And a particular issue in my neighborhood is they're kicking out a lot of, they're going to knock down a fairly good apartment complex that's reasonable rents, and they're going to build this luxury thing and have fewer people that are low income housed, which is, counterproductive. So my understanding is that the building trades were very involved with getting that legislation through to allow these new buildings to go in with just a modicum of low income housing. But anyway, are there any groups that are looking at, or maybe this group looking at, how we can create more housing on public lands, take it out of the capitalist system, have it administered by the government, but in no way create those racially isolated projects from the 30s, those high rises that were all dynamited within a few years. So any thoughts? I'm just curious where I need to go next. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great stuff, and welcome for Fatima or anyone else from SB at Home to weigh in too. But I think you hit on a lot of issues that I think are underlying our challenge. So first, just starting where we are, yes, there are a lot of our jurisdictions who are looking to see how we can better utilize public land to build more affordable housing. Traditionally, what we've been building, how we're building affordable housing now, isn't like directly publicly developed, although some agencies do it. Usually they're helping fund it. So it's a little different model for how we're doing it. And that's really important because as we've heard, we didn't get in the technical, right? But we know that we need housing that's affordable for all sorts of different people. And when we do this kind of publicly funded affordable housing, you can say what the rents are going to be set at. And that's really important. We know for solving homelessness, we have to have these rents that have that our lowest income people can afford. So that's one way we're doing it. And then also just kind of say more broadly, I think, there is a lot of conversation going on about how we expand that. Alex Lee and the Assembly is looking at social housing. There's a lot more interest in looking at other models to build it. But I think we all are starting to recognize in the space that we need more ways of having that truly affordable housing, and that market rate alone won't do it. We need to keep building some of that. And there is some macroeconomics here, but we have to make sure that all of our solutions are looking to see, are we getting that level of affordability to match what the community needs? And we're going to do a lot of it. And the last thing I'll say is, because I do think we need to move away to different types of housing systems, but it's not a foregone conclusion that you can't do this in in our market-based housing solution, at least not for ending homelessness. If you look back, remember the map I showed on there are major metropolitan areas where our homelessness problem is much smaller. And so that has to do, it's not that they aren't part of this capitalist system, but they found a way to build the type of housing they need. They looked at how their overall rents are so that the market rate housing they've built isn't all exorbitant. And so I think there are a lot of ways to do, even though there are some challenges in how our system is, of how we can work within it and keep pushing on some of these levers to make our communities more affordable.
Thanks, David. We have time for maybe 2 more questions. I saw one in the chat. Where can I find example policies to share with local government officials? I could say on our website, we definitely have information there that I think could be helpful. Allison or Matthew, do either of you want to jump in on that question? The question was, where can I find example policies to share with local government officials?
So I'll drop my email in the chat if there are some specific policy areas. There are so many different approaches to addressing the range of different needs that we see in our community. There's not one silver bullet. I think that's important to keep in mind. There is not one solution. It's going to take a wide range of solutions. And what that solution is depends on the needs and your unique community. So I'm happy to drop my email in the chat if you'd like to reach out to me or to Matthew to talk a little bit more about what you're looking at, what your community is and what the specific needs that you're seeing. We'd be happy to talk about that.
I can just jump in quickly. Fatima, you talked about this. David, it was very explicit in your presentation. We know we need to keep people in their homes, and we have policies to do that and make sure that people in emergency situations are supported to prevent them ending up in homelessness. We know that we have to respond to the immediate humanitarian needs of folks who are on the street. The big takeaway, though, from today is that we need more housing that people can afford. And there is a range of different policy solutions at the local level. But it's not a secret that the key to almost all of those are the local resources to create that housing. So we are going to have an opportunity in the coming year to decide as a community if we're going to make a commitment to making those resources available at the local level to build the housing that we need. And there is going to be a measure on the ballot that is going to ask us collectively to make that commitment. So we would love to talk about the detailed policies. In some communities, there have been great discussions in the last year and a half as the cities put together plans to the state, the housing element. But the truth is that we need the resources to follow through on those commitments. And so it's going to take us as a community. I'm not sure which Fatima of your categories exactly it falls under, but I think the thrust of our language about affordable housing is that it's a shared commitment and the benefits are shared across our communities. And so those resources are absolutely critical. So definitely reach out. We can talk about details, but pay attention because there's going to be a lot of discussion about how we respond to that need for additional resources.
And I'll just pick on really quickly, because I think Matthew said it perfectly. I mean, we need more resources to build affordable housing and meet the need in our community. And one thing I just want to add on to is I think we hear this a lot, and all of us probably feel it, right? There's tax fatigue, there's worried about how much money we're spending, but we have to, and this goes back to kind of the messaging standpoint, we have to acknowledge that this is a community-wide need. And our housing affordability crisis, our homelessness crisis, we're feeling it now. We're feeling the past couple of years, but this has been decades in the making. And so if we really want to commit to it and we want to build the community where everyone has a safe, affordable home, which is a goal I think we have to collectively commit to that. Part of that is finding the funding we need. So I think that's one thing, and we'll look forward to hearing more about these measures as they come in onto it. But it's also worth asking for those of you who are active within, advocacy of local governments, cities, how are they spending their dollars? Are they advocating and making sure, are we advocating that they're putting some dollars towards these key initiatives? Our huge federal and state governments as well. What are the choices we're making to make sure that they are putting money into housing initiatives and that funding flows down to our communities to address these needs? And then lastly, I'll say kind of one thing we do at Destination Home, and this kind of follows up on Ken's issue for earlier, is what type of housing are we building? And make sure that when we do have housing dollars, which is not enough, but when we have them, are we addressing those in the needs we need? Are we having a good enough share for our lowest income folks? Are we properly prioritizing that between true, permanent, actual housing and more temporary shelter? And all of that, I think, is important stuff for us to think about. And there's some information on our website, and I'd be happy to talk to for those who want to get more specific in advocating for these type of policies.
And when you're doing that advocating, you can use the language that we have just provided you. So, Corey, could we get the slides back up, please? Thank you for your questions, everybody, and for jumping in, Matthew and Allison. So, the name of this event is Policy in Action, right? So we want you to take something away from this and to put it into action as well. So for us at SV at Home with our messaging campaign, as I said earlier, we want you to use this language. We want you to use the definition and to use the messaging in all of your advocacy efforts in all of the rooms that you enter. And as I said, we're taking this on the road. So we really would love to bring this training. And when we do the full-fledged training, so the messaging was only part of it, but the training that we've built out also includes a context setting portion that Allison does alongside me, and then some activities, and it's interactive and it puts into practice the language that we've provided. And so if you have a group, an organization, a community that you think would really value learning about affordable housing and how to talk about it, please reach out to us. We would be happy to come to you. And if you want to use the definition and the messaging and any graphics that we have provided, the link will be dropped in the chat, but it's also here. It's just bit.ly --define AH, and there's a QR code as well if you want to scan it. And of course, feel free to connect with us on social media. We will be spreading this messaging everywhere, and we hope that you will amplify it and do this work with us because it's really important. So next slide is Destination Home.
Yeah, and so pretty much the same thing as Fatima there. Please feel free to we need you all to do the same thing, and we hope that you'll both learn what you've heard here today. Keep learning because there's a lot more educational and informational resources out there, and then really engage in all the ways you can to have the conversations with your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends. We know, and particularly around these issues, but particularly around homelessness, there's just a lot of misperceptions or a lack of detailed understanding. So how we can engage more people is important. And so that hopefully when there's time to advocate, whether it's who we're going to vote for, what measures we're going to vote for, what decisions come from a council, we have a more informed and engaged community. And, if you go back to those websites I'd shared before, there's all that information. Please make use of whatever's helpful for it. And just like Fatima said, if there's groups that you'd like me or some of our colleagues come in and talk to, we always welcome that opportunity.
Thank you, David. Okay, and now Allison is going to talk about one final thing.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic conversation today. I really appreciate the richness of that, all the great information and strategies that you've both shared. At SV at Home, we believe everyone deserves a safe, stable, and affordable home. If you do too, and you're not already, we invite you to join SV at Home as a member. When you join SV at Home, we can build and sustain a movement for affordable housing because we know we're stronger together than we ever can be in isolation. Because you're so important to us, we want membership to be open and accessible to everyone. So there's no minimum cost to join. Feel free to pay whatever you can. Your membership helps support our work, including programs like the Policy in Action today. You can find the link to join us in the chat, and together we can work towards solving the Bay Area's housing crisis.
Thank you, Allison. We have one quick poll if you could take the time to answer the questions that we have here so we know how we are doing. And thank you, David, again for joining us. And we hope to see you all in the new year at our next Policy in Action. Thank you.